Today I'm going to be comparing 4 of the best modern tenors, but the twist here is that I'm not going to be including a Yanni, Yamaha or Selmer in the mix. Instead, I'm going for 4 brands that really major in this sort of modern vintagey vibe. And in the mixture today we have a Signature Custom, an Eastman 52nd Street, a P. Moriarty System 76 and an Atlantic London, the Duke. Let's get cracking. So first of all, let's just remind ourselves of the different models that we're going to be looking at today before I give them a blow. So first of all, we have the Eastman 652 model, which is the 52nd Street, but not the 852 model, which is the more recent one that introduces this very fancy DS mechanism. The 652 has the original mechanism prior to this new DS mechanism being added to the range of Eastman models. And then next we have the P. Moriarty System 76. If you recall, I did the same video for altos in recent weeks. We used the same models, but with the exception that we chose the 67R for alto. The equivalent in tenor would be the 66R, which is kind of P. Moriarty's flagship model, if you like. But we mustn't forget about the 76 because it is a fantastic instrument that just offers a slightly different tonal perspective than the 66. So that's what we've chosen for today. And next up, to my right here, we have the Atlantic London, the Duke, and this is the unlacquered model. And then finally, on my knees here, we have the Signature Custom Raw XS model. So first up, let's just give these instruments a general blow. And I'm going to be, first of all, testing for general playability and ergonomics before we move on to anything else. Okay, first of all, let's talk about ergonomics. So first up, we've got the Eastman 52nd Street. And I should point out that the latest production of Eastman saxophones comes from their new Chinese factory. Prior to that, they used a Taiwanese factory, and the instruments were really excellent from there, but they upped their game by introducing their new factory, their Chinese factory, and really reinventing the instrument from the ground up. And I've been really impressed with the results since they've done that. They've put a big emphasis on the ergonomics and mechanism in general. And as that's what we're talking about right now, I really do feel the benefits of that because it feels to me great under the fingers. It's a very light key action. It's a very low key action. I love the combination of light and low. Everything is spaced out really nicely. We've got compact table keys, so there's no sort of difficulties in this area here. It feels just very natural to me. And actually, I just don't have any complaints at all. I think they've done a great job. I remember them being pretty good with the Taiwanese versions before, but with this new wave of Eastman models, bear in mind this is the 652 model. There is an 852 above it that has an even more advanced key mechanism. I've done a separate video on that. That is the model that has the DS mechanism and borrows from a flute mechanism that's extra creamy and and fantastic under the fingers. There's all sorts going on with that. We're not talking about the DS mechanism here. This is just their standard mechanism on the 652 version, which feels great in itself. So by the time you move to the 852, then you're talking some serious stuff going on. But to me, this feels great. As I say, light, nimble, everything in the nice place, and I really love the fact that it's got a low key action because it just allows me to just flutter around very easily. So great stuff, Eastman. So next up we have the P. Moriarty System 76, and in general I find it very good. The left and right key stacks feel nicely spaced, as in finger to finger the spacing is good, and it's got a nice poppy and firm key action, very smooth, nothing bitty going on. It feels very satisfying. I would say a couple of little observations here. Let's first of all take the right hand E flat and C. It's interesting that they've got this little lip on the top of the E flat key and on the lower part of the C key. And the bit that trips me up slightly is actually the E flat key, where I find my finger just sort of sits on that ridge, and it can just be maybe slightly irritating if you're on the north part of that key. Once you slip into the sort of the main part of the key, it's okay. But for me, it was just a bit of an oddity and took a little bit of getting used to. Also on the table keys, I find there's a bit more of a dip than I'd like with the B here. In terms of that maneuverability between the B to the C sharp and B to the B flat, can be slightly awkward. I suppose you can get used to it again and you can find an alternative way of making that transition. And actually, just talking about the table keys here on the System 76, there is a little bit of a clangy C sharp there, where I think that we could improve that if it teched a little bit more in this area. But overall, pretty good and robust, as I say. It's been very well engineered, and there's some real quality of build and design here. I've just got a couple of little gripes that I've mentioned there. Next up, we have the Atlantic London. And for me, this feels really great. Again, like the Eastman, I'm just loving the overall feel, the left and right stacks. It's got a nice, approachable key action. Everything just feels very smooth and buttery, and it's relatively low key action, which I really like as well. Everything in terms of the keys on the left and the right, the palms, the tables, side keys, low E flat and C, it all feels great and very natural. And interestingly as well, when I've done a sort of dry keywork test, the Atlantic London for me is the one that has the quietest keywork when we do this general running your keys down the saxophone test, which all us sax players like to do when we're picking up saxophones on the rack. I suppose it is an important thing to mention, because it is important to have keywork that is on the quieter side, doesn't get in the way, particularly perhaps if you're doing recording. You don't want clangy keywork robbing you of your sound and really standing out and spoiling things. So for me, that's just a nice aspect to it. And it's nice also when you get that drier sound as opposed to that slightly more reverberant sound. And again, I felt it was a similar sort of thing on the Eastman as well. Perhaps it's something to do with the fact that this sax, like the Eastman, has rolled tone holes, and in some ways, perhaps those rolled tone holes absorb the sound of the pads as they hit the chimneys as we do this. I don't know. It was just something that occurred to me as I was doing this particular test before playing this instrument. So in general, in terms of ergonomics and playability, really great stuff. And finally, we have the Signature Custom Raw XS. And this one for me is all about mechanism and mechanism quality, because it really feels great. Dave Farley has done a particularly fantastic job of putting this together. Everything feeling very comfortable, feeling relatively light in terms of its action. Not the lightest, but light enough for, I would say, most players. It's interesting to note that they've gone for double arms down here on these two low keys. Not all of them, not the B and the B flat. And in fact, on the other three that I've already spoken about, we don't have double arms there on any of these low keys. So perhaps a little bit more of a recent trend for going for less mass in terms of these lower keys, just to bring the entire weight of the horn down a little bit and make it more free-blowing and responsive. But on this one, it is retained on these two particular keys. What are your views on double arms? Because it is one of those contentious issues. But otherwise, feels great. I like the shape of the palm keys. They feel particularly nice for me, specifically under the fingers, and this is nice and compact here on the table keys. And generally speaking, there's a nice sort of smoothness to all of the side keys. It feels very ergonomically satisfying. So great design, great job. So one of the features of the latest Eastman saxes is that they have sourced a new brass. It's harder and it's thinner, and the idea is it gives more density of sound, more of a defined core sound. And I'm certainly finding that that is the case with this Eastman. I absolutely love the sound. It's really centered, it's really focused, it's got a certain bloom to it as well. And when you push it, it really does have a nice, pleasant brightness to it without being overly bright. So it's just a really well-balanced sound. The sound goes big without perhaps being as big as some of the others, which I will get onto in a minute. But for me, certainly the sound is big enough and there's enough variety of tone from the real sort of dark, soft sounds when you're pushing just a small amount of air through it to the big, striding, vibrant sound when you're really giving it some. So overall, I love the tonal palette on this new Eastman sax. Sounds absolutely fabulous. So next up, we have the System 76, and this model is interesting because we're often talking about the 66R P Moriat, which has this big, luscious, vibrant sound, very thick sound, I would describe it as. And the System 76 does borrow a lot of those qualities, but for me, it moves in a slightly different direction. It's a little bit more focused. And the idea with the 76, actually, if you go back to P Moriat and the way they've designed these instruments, and they've separated out the 66 and 76, is that the 76 follows more of that Mark 6, that sort of classic French sound, whereas the 66 goes more in the Con 10M sound direction. And I definitely feel it with this instrument. It's got lots of drive, a certain amount of focus to it, or perhaps not as much focus as some models, but certainly in terms of the power, it's there in abundance. It's a very powerful horn. And when you put a lot of air through it, of course, the sound goes brighter, but it's not a nasty brightness. Again, it's a quality brightness. So I love the sound of this instrument at peak power, that full-on brightness. And then when you lay it back, it's got that nice soft depth to it, plenty of integrity and character, and a sort of sumptuous nature to the tone. So overall, the spectrum from the dark to the bright is a very satisfying one with this instrument. And now on to the Atlantic London. For me, this has a naturally great, big, beefy sound, a lot of core to it, a little bit like the Eastman. And again, when you drive the sound, it really responds very well to that. It doesn't back off. It holds a really good strident sound, a nice sort of bright contemporary sound when you really push it. But again, like many of the others here, it's not a nasty brightness. It's a really satisfying brightness where you can just operate at that power level and really enjoy the sound. Then also on the other side of things, when you just whisper through the horn, it responds very well indeed. So I find this a very free-blowing horn, actually rather like the Eastman. I also find that equally free-blowing. So just love the qualities of this instrument, from the very soft sounds all the way through to the big, striding, vibrant sound. And finally, onto the Signature Custom. Again, another big, powerful, interesting sound, loads of character to it. And the interesting thing for me about this horn is that when you really push it, the sound is almost kind of raw. It has this extra degree of brightness with this kind of grainy quality to it when you push it. Interesting that it's named the Raw, or in this case, this is the Raw XS. But for me, that is the best adjective that describes the sound that we get with this one over and above the other ones. So it's almost got this sort of leery brightness to it when you really push it. When you lay it back, again, it's got all that depth and interest in the sound. For me, just a little bit more resistant, actually, on this one in comparison to the three others on my right. So in terms of a resistance scale, these are all broadly similar, with the Eastman and the Atlantic London coming out tops in terms of ease of play. With this one here, it is the most resistant out of the four, which for some people can be a good thing, for others less of a good thing. But it was a definite observation as I tested them in that sort of quieter dynamic range, and just found this one a little bit more of a challenge there. But overall, in terms of tone, bags of character, sounds absolutely great. So overall, you might have got the vibe from me in general that I've not got too many bad things to say about these instruments. And that would be because I don't. I genuinely find them all enjoyable to play. As you've heard through the course of this video, I've described different idiosyncrasies with each horn. They've all got their slight tweaks here and there. But the common thread here is that they sound great. They've got an interesting tonal scope from the quiet through to the really loud. And from a player's point of view, surely there's nothing better than that. Picking up an instrument that you feel really passionate about in terms of producing a great and interesting sounding instrument. Because over the years, we have been approached by other manufacturers bringing us different instruments where we try them out and we think, okay, that's fine, but perhaps there's nothing too inspiring about the sound of these instruments. And it's taken us many years to sort of land relationships with the different companies that you see represented here, whereby we really feel confidence in their products. Okay, some of them are more recent than others, but the general vibe here is that they are all well-made instruments, all sounding really great, and there's a story behind each individual instrument. And another point to sort of roll in here is that you might have heard me saying throughout this video, this instrument might be inspired by the Mark VI or the Con 10M or whatever. And there's an element of truth in that. Of course, we do look to these great saxophones of the past. But in a sense, these instruments have developed their own legacy in themselves. They are not just replicas of old instruments trying to do something that the instruments did in the past, but instead they have their own voice, and they can be played like that. They've got their own character, they do their own thing, and they fit in really well in the modern sort of performing world, whereby you need an instrument to do all sorts of things, whether it be playing, a straight ahead jazz piece, or playing in a much more contemporary setting where you really need the horn to perform and kick out and give you some volume. And I'm finding that all four of these instruments really do deliver on that front to various degrees. So from that point of view, I think it's just worth putting a spotlight on this style of instrument, the interesting looking, vintage-inspired modern horn that delivers a lot more than just, oh, it's another Mark VI. No, these are really great horns in their own right. And I hope you guys can come down and prove that for yourself by testing them out, because I really think that you would be wowed by these instruments if you haven't tried them up to now.